Hi, I don't know if any of you has ever experienced something that is racist or has had somebody complain about a racist encounter. Racism. I know I have talked about it, and I didn't talk about it as much as I have now since I started living outside my country. The first place that I went to when I came from Kenya was in the Netherlands, and it was okay. And I remember in Netherlands, that's when it was very clear to me that I'm African. So the only way that I identified myself before then was as a Kenyan. Of course, I knew about other countries, but then when I came out in Netherlands, I remember one of my friends kept on referring to me as you Africans, and I felt that was a very big responsibility because I was not responsible for what, say, South Africans were doing in Netherlands, and I didn't feel like I identified with maybe what West Africans were doing, and so I could not really identify with all of that. But with time, I saw myself and identified myself as an African. And after Netherlands, I lived in the Middle East. And in the Middle East, I worked with all nationalities. I worked with people I never even thought existed, like people from Melanesia, people from Fiji Islands. I didn't know these places existed. And my identity as a Kenyan, and especially as an African, was more enforced, or even to the point of identifying myself as a black. If you'd asked me who's black before, I probably would have told you Black American. That would be a black person. But before I went to the Middle East, I never really saw myself as a black person. So here I am in the Middle East, and people tell me that I'm black, and I accepted that identity. So after the Middle East, I moved in Austria. And I experienced something very interesting in Austria that I didn't experience in the Netherlands. And because by the time I'm coming to Austria, I'm carrying all these identities with me. Whenever I would get into a train, I would be very conscious, and I would see people looking at me, and I did feel like I stood out, but it was so pronounced in Austria, and I couldn't understand because I thought there was lots of black people from Africa. So I felt like the attention was so much more in Austria, and I don't really know how to interpret all that. And I remember thinking so much about it, and I went into reading about history, where Africans came from, just to understand the different races, and understanding Europeans, understanding Africans, Asians. I read a lot and watched a lot of YouTube, a lot of TED Talks, and I think there are so many things that I read. Some were very negative. All this research wasn't helping, because now I was fully conscious about all these looks, and I was making up reasons why these people are looking at me, and all these reasons I was coming up with were not good. So I was turning myself into a racist, and but then at some point I said, why is it that I did not have all these emotions and all these perceptions in Netherlands, where I've had most people complain a lot about racism, but I'm having all this insecurity in Vienna? I mean, why? What's the difference? And I'm the person that changed. I accepted all these identities that I began to go against myself. And so I said, I remember talking to myself. I talk to myself. I remember talking to myself one day and saying, you know what? These people are not necessarily looking at me negatively. They probably don't even know all this media and all these things I went reading and researching. They probably have never come across. They possibly are looking at me admirably. I started telling myself these positive things, and every time somebody stares at me, I would flash a smile. It's not like smiling like a crazy cuckoo person, no. But I would give a very positive and friendly gesture towards a person who's staring. And I started thinking that these people are looking at me because I'm dressed well or I'm beautiful. They're looking at my interesting hairstyle. They're looking at my makeup or whatever it is they're looking at. They're looking at how I've done my nails, my manicure. I changed what I thought people are thinking about me. And soon enough, I stopped being very conscious. I stopped being very hard on myself. I don't even see these people looking at me anymore. Did these people stop looking at me? Were they even looking at me before? And that's the thing. I have seen people complain about racism or nationalism, and every time I see that, I want to stop it, because the problem is not that people are looking at you. The problem is you. You are the one who's disqualified yourself. You're the one who's not accepting yourself. You're the one who's removed yourself and said you don't belong. You do belong. We all are living on earth, and earth is our home. You're human, and that's enough. So before you talk and complain about racism, first of all, be sure that you're not the one who's against yourself. What I want to put out here as a challenge to anybody who's not living in their country. You could even be white, you could be black, you could be yellow, brown. There are certain things that you've accepted as your identities. Some of these identities are good. Some of these identities help us to be able to identify people, but there are certain identities that we have accepted, and sometimes we are so conscious about it. We are so insecure about our race. You're very insecure about your nationality or whatever people say about you, that you already are giving off a very negative vibe, and that is making people maybe keep off. The challenge I want to give us today, the challenge I gave myself a couple of weeks ago, is change your mind. Try and think positively about yourself. All these things that you read about, all these things that are written about your nationality, your race, are written by people who are not you. And you don't have to accept that. If somebody calls you something that you're not, you can decide to accept it or not to accept it. So there are certain identities that we've been given out here. And I consciously have decided there is what I'm going to accept, there is what I'm not going to accept. And I'm going to tell myself good things about me, because truth be told, people are thinking good things about me. Very few people are thinking negatively about me. And if anybody is thinking negatively about me, it says a lot about where they're coming from. They're coming from a negative place, and that is none of my business. And negative people are really none of my business. So if somebody's seated there and they're thinking negatively about me, it doesn't make me a negative person. It makes them a negative person. You have to shift from writing yourself off. And do that. I tell you, it worked for me. Do that for a day. Imagine people are thinking good things about you. If somebody is staring at you, imagine they're looking at your watch. Imagine they're looking at your hairstyle, or they're looking at how beautiful you are. Think about such positivity, and you will attract the same. I could not believe how easy, how quickly I turned things around for myself. And I don't walk around anymore in Austria feeling like I do not belong. I belong in this country. You know why? Because I have a visa. The embassy has allowed me to be in this country. And if there's anybody out here who is illegally, in a country illegally, I would ask you to straighten up your life. Be where you're supposed to be because you're supposed to be there. I hope my experience is going to help somebody out there. It's time we stopped complaining about racism. It's time we fought the vices in this world, not through talking and complaining, but changing ourselves, changing how we think, putting more positivity in our minds. It's time that happened. It has worked for me, and I think it can work for everyone.